Welcome everybody on ARA Philanthropy and Education Special Interest Group and the Tzedakah Lab webinar today, where we're going to talk about research practice partnerships. My name is Chase McNamee, he, him pronouns. I'll be the moderator today. We will have a Q&A portion at the end for 10 to 15 minutes, so please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box or in the chat directly to me or to the group. We really encourage that. And then the last few things, for accessibility, if you do need captions, you can go ahead and click the Show Captions button on the bottom right. And if you need any different languages, those are also there as well. And if anything comes up as you're going, I know a couple of folks had some screen reader options. If you need to do that, I'm happy to share the recording later as well if that is helpful. But for now, I'm very excited, and I'll go ahead and hand the mic over for folks to do some introductions. But today we're joined by Noah Drezner, Oren Pismoni-Levy, Jenny Irons, and Jenny Jung. Very excited to learn from you all today. And we will jump into some questions that are moderated, but to begin, I kind of just want to get started on, who's on the call, the amazing folks that are here. So, Noah, if you wouldn't mind just doing a brief introduction and your background around your understanding of research practice partnerships.
Wonderful. My name is Noah Drezner. My pronouns are he, him, and who, and I am a professor of higher and post-secondary education, as well as Vice Dean for Academic Success and Strategy at Teachers College, Columbia University, and I had the great privilege of being Chase's dissertation advisor and continuing to work with him on research and these discussions. My research and basis is looking at how social identity impacts alumni engagement and philanthropic giving towards higher education. And my interest in research practice partnerships is based in the idea that really a constructivist framework of research and understanding that not only as someone who does research and does theory building is part of this conversation, but also the practitioners that hopefully are going to be able to use our theory and research in practice are also sources of creating that research, thinking about what's needed in the field and how to implement it. It stems off my background before going to graduate school as a advancement officer myself and starting off as a fundraiser and thinking about all the things and tools I needed to be successful, but didn't have. Then I went to grad school thinking I was going to get all the answers and got bit by the research bug and thought about it from this perspective for the past 20 years or so. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noah. And Jenny Jung, would you mind jumping in and doing a brief intro?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chase, for putting this together and inviting us. I'm Jenny Jung. I'm an associate program officer at the Spencer Foundation. I read RPP proposals. The reason why I'm here today is because my colleague, Crystal Villanosa, who is involved in this particular SIG, is traveling. And so she asked me to step in. I'm really happy to be here, happy to learn from you all. I guess my personal stuff is my research is about early literacy, international development in Indonesia. And yeah, I've been at Spencer and we read across all the programs and we're gearing up for another round of RPP, so I'm excited.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as each person introduces themselves, I am going to drop in the chat the links to some info to learn more about each of the programs. And we'll also share that in the recording caption as well after the webinar today. Oren, would you mind jumping in?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Oren Pismoni-Levy. I'm an associate professor at Teachers College in Columbia in New York City. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Chase, and thank you to the SIG for hosting this webinar. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring two communities to think about this idea of RPP or research practice partnerships. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm in the program in international and comparative education here at Teachers College. I study mostly the interaction between social movements and education. I'm interested in how social movements change, challenge, protect education projects worldwide. I'm looking at three cases. For the first part of my career, I looked at international assessment as a movement, how scientists, education scientists, were able to mobilize support for this practice. And then I moved to look at the LGBT movement and how it's trying to change schools worldwide. But over the past, I would say, 8 years, I'm really focusing on what I and others see as the most important threat to humanity, sustainability, and climate change. And I'm looking at how this movement is trying to change schools in the US and abroad. The reason I'm here, I guess, is not only because I served on Chase dissertation committee. I think there are other reasons. Mainly, I'm co-leading a research practice partnership with New York City Public Schools. We've been working together for 10 years with one goal of improving sustainability education in public schools in the city. I will talk more about what it means and what we do later, but for this point, I'll end here. Thank you, Chase, and others for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Oren. And then Jenny Irons.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chase, for organizing this. I'm Jenny Irons. I'm a senior program officer at the William T. Grant Foundation. I'm also a sociologist by training and worked at a Hamilton College and a liberal arts college until about 2013 and left to do some other things and eventually landed here at the foundation. So the William T. Grant Foundation has been thinking about research practice partnerships for a long time. We think of research practice partnerships as mutual, long-term, sustained collaborations between researchers and nonprofits or public agencies that are really meant to be collaborations that are mutually beneficial and that can enhance the production and use of research in ways that for us improve the outcomes for young people, but of course they can be relative to a lot of different areas. And in my particular role at the foundation, I lead our program to fund major research grants on reducing inequality for young people. And in that particular portfolio, we do get applications that involve research practice partnerships, but I also am the staff lead for our institutional challenge grant program. I'm sure I'll mention that several times today, but that is our one grant program that is meant to support partnerships between universities and nonprofit organizations and public agencies to build a research agenda to reduce inequalities for young people, to enhance the capacity of organizations to use research evidence. I don't know the extent to which we'll get into that today, but a lot of people want to use research evidence, but given the limits on their time, don't always have the resources or capacities to do so. But it also recognizes, and I think I'll probably talk about this later, given the questions that Chase has put together for us, that academia doesn't often reward the kind of time and resources it takes to build successful research practice partnerships. So we also ask that our grantees in this initiative engage in strategies to address institutional barriers to better support and incentivize partnership work. So happy to be here.
Awesome. And I have to give a special shout out to the William T. Grant Foundation. When I was writing my dissertation a few years ago, it was so helpful in understanding, research and evidence and research use. And that was what my dissertation was about, was institutional advancement and how all kinds of knowledge and research can be put to use. So really wonderful to have you here, Jenny. And I do want to give a quick space for Lori. If you wanted to say anything, Lori's one of our amazing co-chairs for the AERA SIG around philanthropy and education.
Just that first off, I'm honored and thrilled. I just humbled to be around such amazing researchers and greatness. What I'd like to say is how important this work is. As we move forward into education in 2025, I know that we're going to be looking at some major changes on a national level. And my focus is, of course, K-12, and I do work in higher ed also and at the county level, but I really feel like what we're doing and what you're doing is so important for the future of our nation and our entire world. I think that we're going to be looking at a lot more charters and voucher systems and things happening in public education, and perpetuating the Matthew effect. I believe that the poor will become poorer, and so that makes your work, our work, so much more important. So again, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori, for being here and for all your leadership. And with that, we'll kind of dive in. I do Love a good shared understanding of, research practice partnerships and what we mean with those big words. Jenny Irons, I think you kind of hit it on the head. You gave that definition, but wanted to give space to others who, what your understanding of research practice partnerships are, and also why they're important.
Chase, did you ask someone specifically?
Nope, I'd love for anybody to just jump in. Oren, do you want to kick us off? You just volunteered.
I guess I guess I did. I wasn't sure if you said Jenny Irons. That's why. So I enjoy being in the RPP because it really helps me with addressing a couple of concerns or frustrations I had about the field over the past decade and a half. One of the things that I was frustrated about is that we in academia do a lot of research. We publish books and book chapters and articles and report. And sometimes it's really frustrating that the research is out there, but practitioners on the ground don't use it. And from the other perspective, it's frustrating. I worked in an NGO before I went to graduate school in different NGOs. And it's always frustrating that there is so much need from the NGO side to know how to do better in terms of education delivery or how to do better in terms of developing programs. And I think coming to TC, to New York City, I was looking for something I can do in the city I live in, around the areas that I'm developing my expertise, sustainability. And I found myself in a partnership even before I knew it's a partnership. I started working with colleagues in New York City. They shared data. We did some analysis for them. We gave it back. They started asking questions. And all of a sudden, I find myself meeting with them on a regular basis when we ask a question together and we try to find data to answer. And it was much later, around 2014, 15, that I started reading the wonderful resources that Chase mentioned coming from the William T. Grant Foundation and others, that there is actually research about this phenomenon. It's more than community-based research, and it's more than action research. There is much more internationality in this work, that we are here really to solve a problem that is happening on the ground with policymakers or practitioners, and we can bring some of our expertise to the table. Little did I know that I'm going to learn so much from this experience. So working together with my colleagues in New York City, with teachers, with administrators in different levels, I learned a lot about what it means to actually work and operate within an education system. So I found that it's enriching my understanding in terms of my research and also my teaching. Many of my students benefited from this RPP. So that's why I find them to be so important. There is so much potential there for students, for professors, for practitioners to really come together and do some work that is meaningful in terms of solving problems rather than just problematizing issues.
Thank you so much, Oren. And Jenny Young, I wondered if you might, from the partnership side and the foundation side, what does that look like? What's the importance there?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just elaborate a little bit on what I said earlier to answer this and flag that earlier I put in the website a link to a microsite on our website that's specifically focused on RPPs. It really needs to be updated. But the link I just added in is an about section of that website, which goes into more depth about what we found from our literature on the use of research evidence, and it's very much highlighted and distilled very neatly in the work of Yitzhak Yanovitsky, who's a professor at Rutgers, New Brunswick, that research is more likely to be used when it's responsive, relational, and routine. And thinking about that from the side of nonprofits and practice organizations, saying that it's responsive means that researchers are actually answering questions that practitioners on the ground need to have answered, because often researchers are driven by answering the questions that are interesting to them, that are intellectually interested in. Doesn't always mean that it's going to be responsive to needs and policy and practice organizations. Research is also more likely to be used when it's developed in the context of relationships built on trust. That takes time to build, of course. And research is more likely to be used when it's built into the routines of an organization, like the kind that Oren was describing. So those three things are really important, and those are more likely to exist in the context of research practice partnerships. So that's why we advocate for those vehicles as an important means of improving the use of research evidence to solve policy and practice problems.
Chase, can I jump in just for a moment?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I really love about a true RPP is the symmetrical nature of it. The fact that that there is not the ivory tower and the others in the community, but actually that it's this co-equal conversation that feeds into them. I remember when I was a graduate student, I had my first publication and came out in this journal called the International Journal of Educational Advancement that doesn't exist anymore. But one of the things that this journal had was a practitioner response to every article that came out. And I remember fearing what the practitioners were going to say about my research, even though I was a former practitioner myself. But it was it was in a way to engage practitioners in research, but without this symmetrical nature. We weren't actually in conversation with one another. We just found out what the person printed about wrote about our stuff and printed about it when it came out the same time that was there. A true RPP allows for that conversation to happen and for that feedback to come back and forth. And the example that Oren gave is a wonderful example of his RPP that is with external partners. And I also think that there's a possibility for internal partnerships and internal RPPs within universities as well. And this gets to the research that you've done for your dissertation and beyond, and my own work, where we're thinking about, as scholars of higher education, how might we be able to use the theories that we're developing and the research that we're doing and put it in practice within our own institutions? So, for instance, I think about RPPs not only with external partners that I've worked with, but also my internal partners within the university. How might I be able to help think about questions of alumni engagement issues that my institution is having, and how might their understanding and their practice better serve my research questions and my understanding and the development of theory on motivations for giving and things like that. So I think that there we can have perhaps a micro version of an RPP and also a more macro one when we are going external and thinking about our societal commitments as universities to helping NGOs and the community and the larger community as well.
Thank you so much, Noah. Jenny Jung?
Sure. I think my fellow panelists have covered a lot of ground that really resonates for us at Spencer, especially what Jenny shared about how the WT Grant Foundation thinks about RPPs. I think Spencer shares a lot of those commitments and principles. I just want to pick up on two things. One, what Oren said about intentionality, I think is something that I love about RPPs. There's so much that has to be defined really explicitly about how decision making happens, how to come up with research questions, how to co-analyze data, things that often, so like not every research project that we fund, most are not RPPs, obviously, but so not everything has to have all of these elements, but I think these RPP proposals really shine a light and show us a way to have that kind of more intentionality in all of our research projects, even if they're not necessarily partnership work. Yeah, I think that's the main thing I want to say. The other thing is I really like that idea, Noah, of the practitioner response of a journal. I wish we had that. We could build that in for all kinds of things, review processes. I think that would be great.
Yeah, one of my favorite things with Philanthropy and Education, the journal that Noah's the editor for, is we're required to have a practitioner implication section. So to actually put this into practice, what would it look like? And Jenny, if you mind, I'm going to throw the ball back to you since you kind of teed it up perfectly. What are the key elements to establishing successful research practice partnerships in education and philanthropy? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think so my positionality is a little different than everybody else on the panel because I'm not in an RPP. I've never, when I was in graduate school, I wasn't a part of an RPP team. So I only approach it from the perspective of a funder reading RPP proposals. So I don't know how, I can't speak to how it's all established, but I can tell you from my perspective what we read for to identify a strong partnership. So some of the things off the top of my head are clearly co-developed research agenda, research question, research plan. It's not a case of, researchers coming up with this idea and then basically finding a site for the research, which again, we fund plenty of projects like that. They just don't fall under the umbrella of RPPs. Clearly elements of mutualism, that power has been explicitly addressed. So all of these things that might be kind of uncomfortable to talk about, that they're actually really explicit in the proposal, like that it's 50-50. It's not just either, a site for research or funding for programming from the practitioner side. Decision making is kind of clear that people have thought about contingencies, that there's really clear governance structures, that kind of mutualism and is also reflected in the budget. So yeah, budgets reflect power so that all the participants in the RPP and participants in the research are compensated fairly for their time. Yeah, those are the things that we typically look for. And then I would just say at Spencer, we don't fund new RPPs. We fund partnerships that have some history, some evidence of working together to produce research. So that could be a year, it could be 20 years. There's not kind of a guideline for that.
Awesome. No, I think truly the piece of, although you are in an RPP, that critical connection point of the philanthropy and education of what does it look like to fund these? I love that you're talking about the equity and access piece in these RPPs. I think that's so important because sometimes we have the education component, we have the idea, but then it's like, do we have the funding? Do we have the people power? Have we looked at the power dynamics between the academy and, the practitioners? And so that's so important. Jenny Irons, is there anything you'd add from your side from the Grant Foundation?
I won't add that much because Jenny listed a lot of things, all the things probably that we look for as well. I think the one thing that makes for, in addition to all the things that Jenny named, and perhaps one of the key things underlying that is that the RPP has a coherent and stable structure. So, for example, for our institutional challenge grant grantees, I mean, it's one thing certainly our selection committee members look for when they're reviewing an application. But I will say that, and of course, these are things you can't control, but one thing is going to happen in an RPP is there's going to be staff turnover. It's just almost almost inevitable. So in order for an RPP to persist over time, you need to have a structure in place so that if individuals leave, the work can continue. And that's quite important for us as we evaluate applications for the institutional challenge grant. And we've seen, our teams that were some of the early grantees have been incredibly successful in navigating turnover. I mean, even of, superintendents who are partners in K through 12 partnerships, because they have key people in sort of the mid-level positions who keep the work going, both on the university side and on the practice side. So that's super important. We also, before I joined the Institutional Challenge Grant Program here, actually had pilot work with Spencer where together we funded grantees who had RPP grants with us who came together to address issues related to power and equity in their partnerships. They all found that quite helpful and useful, but the important thing to also note about that is it's an ongoing process. It's not something that happens right at the beginning, but you need to be attuned to throughout, especially because you have staff turnover. So that's the only thing I want to add to all those important things Jenny laid out.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's always sad when it's tied to one person and that person leaves somewhere. Oren or Noah, is there anything, from the researcher side that you would add to that?
Are we still in the question about
Yeah, the successful elements of what it looks like. And also I'd love, Oren, I know from own personal experience, how great you are at thinking about how you do measure that impact of the work that you're doing together through these research practice partnerships.
um, I'm smiling because I was hoping to skip answering the question about impact and to listen how others are talking about that, only because it's really on my mind these days, and I'm a little bit blurry on that. But I would just say that one of the components that I found really important for establishing partnership is the issue of trust and seeing it as a relation building. It's a process. When I work with colleagues in New York City public schools, it's important that they know that they can trust me, that they can share data with me, and we can institutionalize it with an MOU and everything. But it needs to be a basic trust that I'm going to use it only for the purpose of improving a certain goal that we agreed on in the partnership. I think that's really important, building trust, because trust is a useful tool and a resource when we have a crisis or when we have a disagreement or when we have a conflict. And once the trust is there, it's really easy to solve this kind of more contentious moments. Working together in RPP, it's almost like marriage, okay? And there are up and downs, and we need to know how to manage them. And trust is really the foundation there. Another thing that I wanted to mention about an important piece is co-location. I'm a big believer that the partners need to be in the same geographical area. Okay, that's one of the things that I see really important, because it's really important that the partners can go and visit the school together. It's really important that they go and co-attend and participate in meetings that stakeholders are in. I know it's one of the things that when I'm reviewing proposals for Spencer, for example, it's one of the things I'm asking. If the partners are in two different continents, how this is going to work? What's the sustainability of this in different levels? And going back to the question of impact, Chase, I'm not sure I or our partnership has a good measure for the impact. We know that we have good anecdotes where research projects that we've done together improved an element in the system that later on we hope will have an improvement or an impact on students. But to tell you that we have very concrete frameworks on how to do it, I'm not sure we are there yet. I would love to hear from other colleagues on how they think about impact. It's really a tricky question in RPPs. For one reason is that some of the work we are going to do in the RPP is going to have an impact on the ground only in a few years from now. It won't be immediately measured. But I would love to hear from others as well.
I think that Oren is correct that the question of impact is a difficult one. And one of the ways that I've been thinking more recently about impact is what's the impact of the RPP, not necessarily on measurable goals of what the research questions are, that's one level, but also on what's going to happen when inevitably the partnership ends or dissolves. What's the impact that this partnership is going to have that sustains? So for instance, one of the things I think about is when encouraging institutions and institutional advancement offices to think about the kind of data that they collect and how they might be able to better mine that data for the work that they want to do, is not only what can I help them build out in terms of what new data they need or what kinds of questions they can have, but what's going to happen after I leave? How are they going to be able to continue to use that data? What kind of skills can I leave behind so that they're not dependent on an RPP and a researcher at a university to do this work? So to me, a measurable outcome in many ways is like a measurable outcome for a successful nonprofit, that I'm no longer needed. This outsider is not going to be needed because I'm going to leave behind the skill set and the interest to continue on this work without me. Then you can bring me in for another research question or another RPP. But if I successfully do it, I'm going to leave that behind. And that would be something that's not a traditional measurement, but I think a sign of a successful RPP.
Thanks so much, Noah and Oren. Anything else that you, from the foundation side in terms of impact? I know that it's funny, the first thing people always ask me when I present on my research advancement is, how do I get leadership buy-in? And like, what is the impact? What is the ROI? It's like the very first thing. And so I know it's top of mind for practitioners a lot.
I don't have a good answer to this because largely because of how Spencer is completely field initiated. And so I think Spencer is kind of unusual in that we're pretty light touch after granting the funding. But mostly because of the field initiated aspect. So, I don't think we can say from the Spencer seat what we think impact should be for, something that's coming from researchers and practitioners. And we always try to trust the field in that respect. So there is an impact section of the RPP proposals, and Oren's reviewed for us, and he probably has even a better sense, having thought about this a lot, being a panel reviewer. But the impact plans are pretty wide ranging, I would say, depending on the topic, the scope, the geography, things like that.
That's great to know.
I mean, I'll just add, as everybody's already acknowledged, this is a complicated issue. I mean, for us, we don't ask our grantees to demonstrate to us that they've made an impact. I mean, our hope is in evaluating applications where, for our institutional challenge grant program, we're supporting good partnerships that will work towards reducing inequality for the young people that they serve. We've actually conducted our own internal stock taking of our grant program after the first 5 years and found quite prolific use of research evidence across all of the grantees, and which gets to know what you're talking about, is they're setting up their partners to use research evidence for the long term, and that we think is a good thing. We also, of course, are funding work in our use of research evidence portfolio and our major research grant program where people are evaluating the impact and effectiveness of RPPs. And I'll just give a nod to this toolkit that's been put. Oh, see, I can't talk and paste at the same time. A toolkit that's been put together by a team of researchers based on an article that they've written, which I encourage you to share with folks working in RPPs. It's meant for folks working in education RPPs, but it's really pretty broadly applicable. And the toolkit that they developed based on an article they wrote after conducting interviews with a lot of different RPPs is really meant to provide RPPs with tools to be more effective in working together, and can help begin to think about different ways you might track success, maybe or outcomes might be a better term to use than impact. But this work I find is quite interesting and helpful.
This is great, and we'll be sure to share these resources with the audience later as well. And that does lead to, I think, an important piece of all of this to acknowledge. And I do come at it as a scholar practitioner, so I actually practice in the field of institutional advancement at the University of Denver as director of campaign operations. And one of those things that I found in my research is that practitioners very much value research, but they don't have the time to do these research practice partnerships, or they're like, I'm just trying to survive day to day. How am I going to implement these extra things? And so, what do the challenges look like for RPPs, and how can we start to address some of those? And feel free, anybody can jump in. I know it's kind of a broad question.
I can jump in. There are lots of challenges, but I'll just speak to the one you mentioned with having the time and space to use research evidence. I mean, one of the things we've seen with our institutional challenge grant grantees is one of the ways in which they seem to have been successful in improving the use of research evidence and making space for that within organizations that are perhaps already constrained in terms of their resources and time is embedding it in a very sometimes more structural, sometimes more formal and structured way, and sometimes a more informal way into the routines and practices and decision making. So one of the questions you asked, and I know we may not get to it, is about an RPP that had been successful in scaling up. And the one example I'm going to give, and I'm not doing this on purpose, Oren, but it's an RPP that's not located in the same place. It's the researchers are at the University of Toronto, and they're partners of the State Department of Education in Puerto Rico. Now, the researcher is Puerto Rican, and he is back and forth quite a bit. But this is a case where they started off with, I think, 2 projects they proposed in their institutional challenge grant proposal, and they've now conducted 5 together. And I think in part they've been so successful is because one of the things they did was embed a researcher in the Puerto Rico Department of Education. So they took some of their grant dollars and paid for someone to be there as, I mean, not just a project manager, but a PhD who really understood the projects and was able to serve as a broker really to ensure that projects were sustained and engaged. So that's been an effective approach. More informally, our partnership at Georgia State University with Achieve Atlanta, they found that just simply giving office space at Achieve Atlanta to their university researcher has been quite important. So he's there once a week. Sometimes he's just doing his own work, but other times they call him into meetings or they go to him with a question. So just finding different ways to make that bridge a little shorter so the distance is not as hard to travel can be an effective way to navigate that resource barrier.
I love that, just the physical space aspect of it. And oftentimes it'll be interesting thinking about like the conceptual use of research where it's like we can't plug in A to B, but it does give us the ability to say, let me think about this a little differently, or how would someone think about it differently, and then start to have some new ideas and inject new things. Noah, Oren, Jenny, Jung, any I guess challenges and also examples of successes. We'd love to get to those as well, because I think that's a big part of all of this.
I'm gonna pass my time to Oren.
Wow, thank you so much.
The gift to Oren.
So I want to talk about the challenge and then about a success story in terms of upscaling. A challenge that we had in our RPP in New York was in 2 moments. We had 2 different challenges. One is around issues of equity, especially around the time where the Black Lives Matter movement started, and the discourse changed in academia much faster than it changed in other places. So I was asking my colleagues to think about, okay, how can we look at issues of equity around race, ethnicity, gender, when it's coming to sustainability education in schools? Who is doing what? Who is getting the task to do this kind of work? And my colleagues were very worried about engaging with this kind of questions because of the political climate they're operating in. And that was one of the moments that was very contentious around how to convince them that it's time to look at these questions. So we did a pilot. So it was really building their trust that the data that they're going to collect is going to be useful, they can act on it. So we did a pilot on collecting this kind of questions. They were really worried that people won't engage well or will even be offended by us asking questions about race and gender and age. And I showed them that this is a common practice in social science, that sociologists have been asking these questions on surveys for decades, and there is something to learn from that. And then something changed in the DOE. Back then it was the DOE, and the chancellor was all about this topic. So all of a sudden they were able to show the chancellor that they are ahead of the curve internally by engaging with these questions, by looking at who is doing what, who is being tasked with what kind of requests, etc. That was an interesting moment. Another moment is where they felt like sustainability for them is more or should be more about climate change. I came from a paradigm that sustainability is more broad, about the 3 pillars of economics, environmental issues, and social issues. And I had to trust them that they know what they're talking about in terms of this is the real challenge for the system, climate. And we pivoted very quickly into looking at climate change education. And I think that was a big success in doing that, because soon after New York City did it, a lot of other systems, international and domestic, really started to focus more on climate than on sustainability. So again, the tension was how to move forward without giving up what we've done before, and the idea that we are creating some kind of a longitudinal study that we will be able to measure change over time. All of these questions really were moments where we had some disagreement. I want to talk quickly about upscaling. I'm very proud that the research that we've done in New York is now being taken up by an international organization, the OECD. And the OECD is known in education as the organization that is sponsoring PISA, the program of international student achievement that rank countries usually based on student achievement. The OECD really liked what we did around climate and sustainability in the city by focusing on building capacity among educators. And they asked me and my center at the college to write a questionnaire for teachers, not to assess students, not to test students, but to really focus on teachers, to build capacity there around this issue. And next year, they're going to publish a report from 54 different countries. And it's 54 different countries that the instrument was really based to begin with in New York City. We had to do a lot of adaptation for different social contexts, low income, middle income, high income countries. But this is one example of how a study from an RPP can be upscaled to other countries, with the hope that other scholars in other countries will take it as a starting point to do more local research as well.
I love that so much. I think that is a key part as we all think about philanthropy and education and beyond, is that, we have folks who fund this important work, the researchers, practitioners, but then governmental agencies and community partners and those who are truly being affected by the research, whether that, may be positive or, unintentional negative consequences. And so I thought that part was really neat, how you can spell that out and how it looks different in different countries and different spaces. Noah, is there anything you'd add from an example of a successful research practice partnership and what that looked like?
I'll speak quickly to challenges, and then I think that I want to make sure that we have time to get to the Q&A. But I think one of the challenges, and something just to always be cognizant of, is that making sure that the researchers and practitioners are always speaking the same language, or that you take the time to do the translation. Because I think that one of the largest challenges to RPPs is, well, a few of them is sustaining that symmetrical nature that I was talking about, where it's not just the ivory tower and the community, but that we're co-equal partners. And that might mean making sure that we think about not only the practical nature of the work that we're doing, and the problem of practice that we're helping to solve, but also not just ending up doing evaluation studies for the NGO, but actually thinking about theory building. But that also means to bring in concepts and theories and talk about them and how they're going to be helpful, thinking about how to translate the importance of the research to the academic nature as well, right? And then allowing for practitioners to say, I get that, I get what you're talking about, or no, I need some more information about that. But quite honestly, here's the problem of the moment that I need you to help me with. And how can we get all of those goals accomplished? And I think a lot of that is taking the time. Oren talked about the trust building, but it's also about building the language, building a common shared understanding of that language, and making sure that the work supports everyone's needs.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's a great segue into the Q&A, and what one of the questions I think we want to start off with from the Q&A is around, what will these research practice partnerships continue to look like? How will they adapt and evolve? I think now more than ever, we're in a space where we have folks who have different ideas. Which organizations do we have trust in? Do we have a sense of belonging? And so, from you all's perspective, what does the future of research practice partnerships look like? What is the importance of that? How will they evolve? Jenny Irons, can I start with you?
I was hoping you would start with other people. Um,
I'd love to just put you all on the spot, throw it out there.
so here's my hope. As I mentioned, the fourth goal of the Institutional Challenge Grant is that universities commit to engaging in changes to better incentivize and support um, partnership work, because it often takes a kind of time that can create a gap between those peer-reviewed publications and other things that you need for tenure and advancement. Um, and there are lots of other barriers universities need to address, like institutional review board procedures, compensation for people participating in research and partners. So there are a lot of barriers that need to be addressed. And so we see our grantees doing that. There is also a growing community across the United States and globally, really, of people thinking about higher education and how it needs to shift to better support partnership research, in part because university leaders are recognizing that they often have a crisis in their local community where they need to address longstanding barriers. And one way to do it is to demonstrate a commitment to supporting local organizations and addressing community issues and questions. And so this is, hopefully a way that higher education can change in positive ways to be more impactful in local communities. I'll also say that, who knows what the next 2 to 4 years or longer are going to be like. We've already seen our partnerships wrestling with political climate and pushback on the work that they need to do and the questions they need to be answered, especially in youth serving systems. So it's going to be a challenging time. And one thing we do as a funder is, to the extent that we can, support our grantees and learning communities so that at the very least they can come together to address shared challenges and problems. But we certainly look to be part of larger conversations about how philanthropy can support this work going forward so that it can continue to be strong.
That's such a good point. Yes. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things with research practice partnerships that we're starting to all get to is that we want it to be useful, but there's also a lot of navigation of different cultural elements, organizational culture, what practitioners can and can't do safely in the organizations. And so there's a lot of elements of trust building there. Jenny Jung, from your perspective, anything that you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I loved what Jenny just shared, thinking about incentive structures at universities. I think another part of that is definitely thinking about graduate training and yeah, how can we get it so that more grad students can write their dissertations having worked on an RPP, given that you're supposed to get through your program in 5 to 6 years or 5 to 7 years or something like that. You're probably not going to see the end of the RPP. What does that mean for both, place commitment, commitment to an organization? So thinking through some of this stuff, I think will be important moving forward. In general, yeah, having longer time horizons, I think that's important, longer commitments. And yeah, equity and outcomes is important, but equity in process is super, super important. So this gets back to the whole impact question as well, is like, you want things to get done, and there's a lot of problems out there, and you want to work on them now and come up with solutions, but you also want to make sure you're doing it in an equitable way with your partners. Otherwise, I don't think you're ever going to get to those solutions. I think that's what I can share.
Wonderful. And Jenny made a point in the chat too that I think is so critical, especially as I think about the grant work that y'all do, is early career researchers are often very motivated by RPP work, yet not incentivized or trained to do it. So you may get in too deep, or, something as a new scholar in the field I've run into is that you also get into these systems and you're like, oh, wow, I am navigating 3 or 4 major systems that aren't talking to each other. I'm a new scholar in the field, and so trying to build that out. One of the findings from my dissertation was that over 400 knowledge sharing tools or resources exist in the field of institutional advancement that were reported. but none of them are talking to one another. So it's all very organic, which is really cool in some ways, but really tough in some ways as well. So that's such a great point. Noah,
Just,
anything you'd add?
just, yeah, just building on, piggybacking off of Jenny Irons and your discussion about early career researchers is also thinking about how the tenure structure works at universities. And as Oren has talked about, and we've all added to, the amount of time that it takes to build a strong RPP and the amount of trust that needs to be built in order to have a successful RPP does not fit the timeline for the level of productivity that we need in the current structure for tenure. And we need to be thoughtful about that. And we also need to start thinking about what does tenure look like? What are the incentives? How might we be able to think about not only the trainings around RPPs, but also acknowledging the work to build them in the tenure and promotion structure. At many institutions, you might even think about that to do a successful RPP, some people might be worried not to even do that after tenure, but wait until they're promoted to full so that they have the level of productivity necessary. And that to me is really worrisome because that is taking people out of this important work just based on, dare I say, antiquated ways of looking about scholarly production and scholarly contribution that are baked into the tenure system, particularly in the US and many other countries as well.
I just want to add one quick thought, and then I see there is a question from Kevin in the chat. But one of the things that the future will bring to us is different expectations for what counts as research. While I guess we might agree that research project looks the same way and then end up in a report, paper, book, chapter, whatever, I think the field is asking us to come up with different ways of communicating our finding with stakeholders. And that brings another question for how this is going to be counted for tenure, promotion, and others from the side of the academic. So I think the shape of research, how it looks like in terms of the output, is going to change dramatically in the coming years. We see many more colleagues right now thinking about short reports with podcasts, short reports with blog posts that accompany them. There are different ways to think about it. My colleague here, Lalita Vasudevan at Teachers College, keep reminding me that research can be thought in a multimodal way, not only in how we collect the data, but how we share the findings later on.
That is a perfect connection to a great question from Kevin around thoughts on data ownership. So we always talk about, big data and all these pieces, but and Oren, I'm going to ask you to jump in here, and then others as well. But who owns the data? How is it accessed? Who has that data once the partnership concludes? These are some sticky questions that I'd love for you to help us think through.
So quickly, I will say that in our case, the data is shared by both sides, where the DOE, the New York City Public School, collect the data through their different channels. As Jenny Irons said earlier, it's part of the routine. We're not adding any additional task. And then once we play with the data together, or our team is doing some analysis, everything is co-shared. So we have a shared folder that they can use it for their own purposes, if it's reporting to the chancellor, their annual report to the public or whatever, or we can use it for publications. In most publications, we are trying to write them together, where authors from both sides are joining and taking different parts of the paper. And now we are thinking actually about not only ownership in terms of this organization or that organization, but how do we make the data available for the public, for other scholars to use, and for the public to actually hold school accountable about what they do around sustainability. So we're thinking and playing with different ideas on how to make this data online, available online, so others can enjoy from what we did so far.
Noah, is there anything you would add? I know we've actually worked together on, what data looks like in data sharing, and it's been a journey sometimes. Anything you'd add from your perspective?
I think that Oren hit it, is that this whole idea that I keep on coming back to, that it's co-equal partners and symmetrical, means that the data is co-owned and co-constructed together. What's going to be collected, how it's going to be collected, and thinking about how it's going to be useful for both sides. And it goes back to my point of, before, and then how Jenny talked about this idea of embedding someone in the Puerto Rican Department of Education, I think it was, is that it's also about not just sharing the data, but giving the skill set to our partners to actually use the data, right? So just having access to the data set is not helpful if you don't know how to do the analysis, how to use it, how to read the code book, how to ask your own questions and be able to use the data to answer them. Yes, you can certainly call your research partner at the university for help for that, but really thinking about the sustainability of that beyond the partnership, or to just play in the data yourself and then come back with other questions to ask, or saying, how can this help our practice, is really important.
Awesome. And in our last few minutes, Jenny Z, anything you'd like to add as we think about the importance of research practice partnerships?
I don't have anything to add. I think we've covered a lot today. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Same.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. We will have a recording available. Feel free to share far and wide. We want this to be as useful to as many people as possible. A huge thank you to Noah and the Tzedakah Lab, and Lori, and our whole AERA Philanthropy and Ed SIG. We have some resources that we'll share that the panelists all shared here, along with the recording. And if you have any follow-up or questions, or want to do anything that builds on this work, please feel free to email me and we can connect you with the right people. I always say I won't have the answers probably, but I can connect you to the people that do have the answers. And thank you again so much to our panelists for giving their time, knowledge, and expertise, and joining us on a wild time of the year with a lot going on. So
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Chase.
awesome. Thanks all. Take care.